My name is Pierce Delahunt. I have a Master of Education in Humane Education and my thesis was in activist education. I care very deeply about these things, and I am super overwhelmingly privileged, and I do my damnedest to leverage that rather than sit on it or weaponize it for harm. Our theme is aftercare, because I think that the question of aftercare in an institutional sense kind of inspires the question, what do we do after harm has already happened? And of course, especially here in the United States, but across the planet, that's a huge conversation when we're talking about how do we have accountability for harm and what does that look like? There are a couple different reasons that people cite prison for, and I would argue that the two that are most at play in the United States system are punishment and deterrence. Punishment much more than deterrence, actually, but those are the two that are most at play. We have, therefore, a punitive model of if you want to call it accountability. I refuse to call it a justice system. I believe it is an incarceration system, and we'll get into a little bit about that. But we have a punitive model for how this works. So here are some statistics to throw at you. The USA has the highest incarceration rate on the planet, more so than any other nation. Depending on how you're measuring it, arguably in world history, certainly at this moment. By and far, and especially far and away compared to all other like quote unquote first world global north fellow NATO member nations, those kinds. So we are looking at in our system, I think it's about 2 or 3 million people in the incarceration system, 95% of whom are in that system without having had a trial. And we think of that as an inalienable human right that our country is founded on, that you inherently have the right to trial. But if every single person who's ever tried pushed for a trial, the entire system would collapse. The entire incarceration system would collapse. So there are some people who are incarcerated because they can't afford bail and they're waiting a trial. But a lot of people are actually incarcerated because they never had one in the first place, because it's actually pretty expensive to go to trial. And it's gate kept from us. So we have a system of incarceration that is very much dependent on the wealth of the person being accused, such that you stand a better chance of walking away free if you are guilty but wealthy than you have the chance of walking away free if you are innocent but poor. The police, as ruled by the Supreme Court, has said that the purpose of police is specifically to protect private property. It is not to protect and serve human life. That is literally just a slogan that police departments chose. It's a marketing slogan, to protect and serve. And the police are not required to respond to a call where a person's life is threatened. They are free to decline that, and they have. That was the case that took them to the Supreme Court. It wasn't a call; it was a subway issue in New York City. Police refused to go in to a specific subway car. They waited until the person had already harmed a number of people, and when that was taken to court, the Supreme Court said police aren't required to do that. They're only required to protect private property, and this is why the same police that if you have squatters who are moving into the 10th property estate or the 100th property of a landlord, so that they can have shelter. Police will do their damnedest to evict all of them. This is why people who are currently at line 3, who are protesting the warming of the planet and the endangerment of a fifth of the world's water supply as a pipeline that has the some of the dirtiest fuel that we can have is being built across a fifth of the world's fresh water supply, and why, even though it's violating the Constitution in being built across unceded Anishinaabe Treaty territory, police are more focused on kicking those people out of the situation so that business and private property can operate as usual. And you will still see those same police throwing the only shelter or the only possessions that an unhoused person has into the garbage, or just destroying it. Whether that be a tent or a cardboard box or whatever shelter it is they use, because the police exist to protect private property, not to protect personal property. Police have already established that they're not actually required to protect and serve human life. They kill about 1,000 humans every year. That is just about 5% of all, it's called non-self or non-suicide gun deaths, which actually about double the rate of all gun deaths, whether willful, malicious, or accidental, I believe are the criteria for some of those categories on that website there. So police shootings of other people account for more than 5% of all non-self or non-suicide gun deaths. And that's just the shootings. The murders that police are accountable for that are not shootings are only a little bit, but that's still just the shootings. Incidentally, police also kill about 1,000 dogs every year as well. So there's ongoing references to that as well in some of the leftist meme culture. U.S. police budgets are roughly $115 billion across the country. That's state and federal. This number is more than many countries' military budgets. And this is why people, in part, why people have been pushing to defund the police. And I want to also emphasize that number itself is also actually an underestimate, because it does not account for, if you have, for instance, school resource officers, typically their salaries are paid for in part by the police department that is providing the officer, but also in part by the school where the officer works. So some of our education budget is also going to police. And that is also true about ROTC and JROTC programs as well, that some of our education budget is going to the military budget. And it is actually defund the police, that movement. It wasn't jobs, not jails. It wasn't care, not cops. It wasn't books, not bars, but it was defund the police. And that movement, which is not to discredit all those other movements, because they did contribute in building up the momentum and everything, a lot of the foundational groundwork. But it was the defund the police movement that actually managed to reduce some funding. Still an incredibly small amount comparatively. I think it was about $15 billion was managed to be defunded from the police and rerouted to other things. Thankfully, very grateful for that. But that's the size of the problem we're looking at, is $115 billion dedicated to protecting private property over life. Police also steal roughly $3.4 billion every year in what is called civil forfeiture. If you're not familiar with that term, that refers to if, for instance, police pull you over and you have some cash in your glove box or whatever the case may be, anything that they can argue, we suspect that this happened, that this cash or product or whatever it is you have, this property was involved in a crime, we're just going to take it. That's it. No trial, nothing. Don't need to show any of that information or evidence or even kind of any really strong reason why you think that money was involved in a crime or anything. But they will take it, and that is $3.4 billion every year that the police steal from working class people, because to be clear, they're not stealing from the wealthy in this situation. They wouldn't get away with it. And then prison labor is enslaved labor. You have a variety of prison labor kinds of programs that have some degree of choice from one program compared to another, but they are all work being done by people who cannot escape, and that is enslaved labor. Um, and that can look a lot of different ways, but that is why every prison built in this country is also a factory, or whatever kind of service that the labor provides. For instance, firefighting in California, and people have leaked saying sheriffs and jail staff, prison staff have leaked a statement saying things like, we can't let these people out because they're too valuable as workers. And that is an incentive to imprison people when we can freely exploit them for their labor. If they were promised the same working conditions, including pay, that everyone outside of prison can get, which is already not enough, but that would de-incentivize the state from incarcerating other people. So that is just a little bit about our current punitive model of quote unquote accountability. We have, out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 975 perpetrators will walk free. This information comes from RAIN. You can see out of the 1,000 sexual assaults, 310 are reported to the police. 50 of those reports lead to arrest. 28 cases will lead to a felony conviction, and 25 perpetrators will be incarcerated. You can see there's even a drop-off between actually being convicted and actually being incarcerated. And that happens for a variety of reasons. Jeffrey Epstein actually was convicted, but was still allowed to go to work. And he would leave and return to jail to and from his work. And people actually didn't even know that he was convicted or in jail, some of them, because he was able to show up at work. Such as one example of that. But you can see our punitive system of accountability is not actually holding sexual assaulters accountable for much of anything. But even beyond that, we can see, so 97.5% of sexual assaulters are not held what our system calls accountable. And then we have more than 5,700 missing Indigenous women and girls in this country. And there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous women and girls who are missing and who are victims and survivors of sexual assault, partly because the police on the tribal land or the reservations or wherever it is that they are don't actually have jurisdiction to prosecute a person who's not Indigenous. So if a white person just rolled up on a reservation and sexually assaulted some Indigenous women and girls or anyone, then the Indigenous police would not have a jurisdiction to prosecute and wouldn't be able to do anything. All they could do is refer that to other people. And partly because of that and other things, that is why we have a crisis in this country of missing Indigenous women and girls. If you're not familiar, when a person is sexually assaulted, it doesn't have to be full-on intercourse, but especially with full-on intercourse, there's a rape kit that can be collected. And it's meant to secure things like DNA from the attacker, the assailant. And those kits are then put together and they are meant to be sent in for analysis. We currently have hundreds of thousands of rape kits all across the country which are just sitting in police departments that have not actually been sent to any lab. That are not being analyzed for anything. This is allowing sexual assailants to continue because they are not being found, because they're not actually being looked for in the system. Some of those rape kits are destroyed without notification to anyone. and within the statute of limitations. So whatever the statute of limitations are, given the state or county or federal jurisdiction or whatever the case may be, if it's X amount of time, they may even destroy the rape kit before that time runs out and without notifying the survivor, and just give up on all that evidence and information. And we have hundreds of thousands. I believe every major city has a significant number of rape kit backlogs, except New York City, I believe, is the single exception in the country. So that is just one way that our punitive system is not actually holding any sexual assaulters accountable. The majority of states in the United States allow police to have sex with those who are in custody. This is rape. The majority of states allow police to have sex with a person who is in custody. That is not a place, that is not an environment where fully informed and free consent can occur. In a situation where a police officer may have sex with someone in custody, that would be a case, if someone were to try to file charges against rape, that would be a case where the police officer could say that the person that was in custody consented. And that is just not something that can happen when you are in custody, in police custody, under the power of the state. That's the majority of states in the country allow police to rape those in custody. Every year, 200,000 prisoners across the country are sexually assaulted. This has been noted that it may well be that the United States is the first culture in global history where more men are raped every year than women, which is not to say that it's better, but to say that our system is one that so allows for the stripping of rights if you are considered to be what we call a criminal, that we allow sexual assault to happen to you. And I'm going to argue, and it's not just me who makes this argument, but I'm going to argue that in a quote unquote system of accountability that allows for 200,000 people to be sexually assaulted every year. Mind you, that's not the number of sexual assaults, that's the number of people sexually assaulted. Where 200,000 prisoners are sexually assaulted every year, we're not going to have any other culture than rape culture, if that is the culture we have. Restorative justice, then, is an attempt to repair a harm that has already happened. There are the 5 Ds of disruption that comes out of work from Hollaback. I'm sure that there are other people involved in that work, but I was introduced to it via an organization called Hollaback. The 5 Ds of disruption: document, distract, delegate, and direct are 4. The one we're going to be focusing on today is delayed, because it is a disruption of a harm that we can do after the harm has already occurred. And that's what restorative justice intends and attempts to do. So we talked about those 2 reasons of the current model of punishment and deterrence, establishing that it certainly doesn't do a good job at deterring anything if the amount of crime that we talked about is still happening. And I would argue that the punishment isn't actually contributing to much good at all. The other 2 reasons are rehabilitation, which we're going to talk about a little bit here, and incapacitation, which we're not so much going to get into. So some examples of delayed disruption include, I work in a lot of schools, so I use this example: checking in with the person who was bullied or with the person who was bullying. You can have those conversations of, hey, what's going on? Like, what do you need right now? If they were bullied, like how can we contribute to you feeling safer here? And checking in that way. The bullier, what's going on? Like, why are you doing this? And how can we get those needs met in other ways? And making sure that behavior is not okay. in the context of these kinds of sexual assaults, asking survivors their needs, and that doesn't have to be sexual assaults either, but in all kinds of restorative justice, there is a conversation around what survivors are needing, and going through those rape kits is one really strong example of how we can apply delayed disruption of harm and actually provide some amount of justice or peace of mind and heart to the survivors, and some people who have also not survived. It's important to name that. Another one of my favorite examples of delayed disruption is reparations, which we absolutely owe and need to pay. Those are just a few examples of delayed disruption of harm. But the four corner posts are what they call the restorative justice are inclusion, encountering, amends, and reintegration. So just briefly on that, inclusion being everyone needs to be included in the conversation. Now that's the person who may or may not have committed a harm. That is the person who was harmed. There's also the community at large, because the community wants to have wants to be a part of that conversation. There's an encountering where the different parties encounter each other, and that does not have to be face to face. That's important to name. No one is demanding that a person who was sexually assaulted encounter face to face their sexual assaulter. Not anyone involved in restorative justice, anyway. And then there's an amends process about what needs need to be met to help reach some kind of repair. And then there's reintegration as a really key part of this for both the people who have harmed and the people who were harmed to be reintegrated into the community. And that's important to name both people, because we often shun and castigate the criminals, but then we also often shame and ostracize the survivors, especially of something like sexual assault, where now that this bad thing has happened to you, you're no longer a fully fledged member of our community because you contribute to our own feelings of shame, or whatever the case may be there. Transformative justice, little different, but very, very much aligned. Restorative justice says a harm has happened. Let's try to repair the harm. Transformative justice says, let's try to repair the harm, but then let's go a step further. Let's look at what is it about our system that facilitated this harm to happen in the first place, and how can we change the system such that the harm is less likely to occur. It insists that accountability begins before harm has occurred. And there's a couple other ways that I think that kind of dynamic plays out. At an interpersonal level, I would say that listening begins before the person has started speaking to us. And in that same way, we're accountable to people before they introduce themselves to us, before they start speaking, before we've harmed them. We're still accountable to them. Some things about that, then, if we look at ways that we can invest in our community and transform systems, if we provided, for instance, hypothetically, universal housing, food and water, education, healthcare, a basic income, and a job guarantee to every person in this country, crime will go down. And not just the kind of crime, I want to emphasize, because crime is also a social construct, not just the kind of crime that we think about of like someone robbing from a store, or the kind of stranger danger stereotype of sexual assault that we have, but all kinds of crime would go down. In a world where there is universal housing, food, water, education, healthcare, basic income, and a job guarantee, you're also going to see fewer people in prison at all, which means fewer prisoners being sexually assaulted. You're going to see fewer people being robbed by the police. You're going to see much less crime overall. The very crime of someone of a capitalist exploiting your labor and taking the surplus value of your labor, that would be reduced because everyone would have a universal basic income. I would argue that houselessness is a fucking crime, and in a world where everyone has housing, crime has already gone down. but it's not considered a crime by the state because, again, crime is a social construct. But again, in this world where we transform systems such that we have this, crime will go down on multiple levels, in multiple fronts. That's what transformative justice is about, is saying, okay, so we have this instance, right, of sexual assault has occurred. So we're going to do the restorative justice thing. We're going to try to repair the harm that has occurred there. And we're also then going to try to change the system so that this given instance of crime, sexual assault, occurs less frequently. And I would argue, again, in a world where people are more empowered with housing, food, and education, you're going to see sexual assault go down amongst other all forms of crime. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate that. Take a look at the other My Sex Bio stuff, please. Most of their other stuff is around more applied sexuality, like how can I reclaim my sexual narrative, and how can I reclaim more pleasure for myself, which I think is really important work as well. So all good stuff around. Thank you so much for joining.